Hi everyone, it's Roo from the King's Roost, and welcome to Maintaining Your Sourdough Starter. I assume you watched my first video on sourdough starters and you have a starter that's ready to go, but a lot of people have been asking me, what do I do once I have it going? I figured the best way to answer that question is simply demonstrate how I actually feed and use my starter on a weekly basis. So I'm just going to jump right in. I have some dough that I've already prepared. This dough has already been mixed and just needs starter added. So I'm going to put in 100 grams of starter because that's what this recipe calls for. I'm going to zero out my scale and measure out my 100 grams. It doesn't have to be exact. We're just getting to roughly 100 grams. I'm going to do that 2 times because I actually am making 2 loaves of bread. There is not enough starter left in here to make another loaf of bread. So I need to feed it. How much do I need to feed my starter? Well, you can't answer that question until you know how much starter you have. Use your scale to measure how much this whole thing weighs. This whole thing altogether weighs 300 grams. I happen to know, because I've written it on the container, that this container weighs exactly 200 grams. So I know that I have exactly 100 grams of starter in my container. If I have 100 grams of starter, what I do is I then take that 100 grams and I feed my starter so that I end up with 300 grams, which is what I started with today. In order to get to 300 grams of starter, I take my 100 grams of starter, add in 100 grams of water, and 100 grams of flour that I just milled a few minutes ago. 100 grams of water. Give it a quick stir to dissolve this and get all the starter kind of in the mix. And pour in 100 grams of flour. Give it a quick stir. How do you know when it's ready to use? Typically, at room temperature, it'll ferment and grow and double in size in about 4 hours, give or take. But an easy way to tell is to keep track of its doubling in size. You can put a rubber band on, put it roughly at the level that the starter is at, and after a few hours, you'll really notice by comparing the level to the rubber band whether it's ready. The question that I get a lot is how much do I use in a loaf of bread? Using 100 grams of starter should be just fine to replace in any recipe that calls for a packet of yeast. You never need to throw any starter away. You should be managing the amount of starter that you have so that you have enough to use when you need it, and then you feed the starter by replacing what you've just used. So to recap, I had 300 grams of starter to begin with. I then took 100 grams out and put it in one bowl, took another 100 grams out for my second loaf of bread, and I replaced it by using 100 grams of water and 100 grams of flour. A good rule of thumb for feeding your starter is use equal parts flour and water by weight to double or triple. In my case, the example I gave you was I tripled the starter, going from 100 grams to 300 grams, but you can use any amount from doubling your starter to tripling or quadrupling it. I wouldn't recommend going much more than that, but that is all there is to it, and don't waste any starter by throwing any away.